They told me the isolation of the Appalachians would eventually make me talk to myself. They warned me about the bears, the sudden storms, and the illegal growers. But nobody warned me about the stairs. My name is Jack, and I took the job at Fire Tower 4 to escape a past that was trying to kill me. I thought I was alone out here in the deep green wilderness. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday, dead calm after a week of torrential rain. I was patrolling Sector 8, a dense patch of forest rarely touched by hikers. The air smelled of pine needles and wet earth. That's when the color white caught my eye. It was so bright, so clean, it looked like a glitch in the world. I pushed through the ferns and froze. Standing in a small clearing was a staircase. It wasn't a ruin. It was a pristine, spiral staircase made of white marble, complete with a polished mahogany banister. It rose about 15 feet into the air and ended abruptly. No landing, no door, just empty air. The sight of it made my stomach turn. It wasn't just weird. It felt wrong, like seeing a shark swimming in a cornfield. My instinct as a ranger was to investigate, but my instinct as a human was to run. I gripped my radio, my knuckles turning white. I walked closer, drawn in by the sheer absurdity of it. I reached out to touch the cold stone, but my hand stopped inches from the surface. Resting on the third step wasn't leaves or dirt. It was a child's yellow raincoat, perfectly dry, folded neatly, and sitting on top of the coat was a walkie-talkie. As I stared at it, the walkie-talkie crackled to life and a child's voice whispered, "He's coming, Jack." It paralyzed me. It sounded exactly like my niece, Emily. But Emily was safe in Ohio, hundreds of miles away from this nightmare. My mind raced to the only logical conclusion. Marcus. Marcus was the man I had testified against, a cleaner for the cartel who promised to cut my tongue out. If he was broadcasting a recording of my niece, it meant he knew everything. He wasn't just hunting me, he was toying with me. I snatched the radio and the yellow raincoat, diving into the thick brush just as a twig snapped nearby. I didn't run back to the tower. That was a death trap. Instead, I belly crawled through the mud, hiding behind the massive root system of a fallen oak tree about 50 yards away. My heart was hammering so hard against the forest floor I was sure the ground was vibrating. I watched the clearing through the leaves. Minutes felt like hours. The stairs stood there, gleaming white and innocent in the sun. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows on the opposite side. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man in a dark tactical jacket, holding a pistol with a suppressor. Marcus. He had actually found me in the middle of nowhere. But he wasn't looking at my tracks. He was staring at the stairs with a look of total confusion. He lowered his weapon slightly. He stepped closer to the marble structure. "Jack?" he called out, but his voice wavered. He wasn't looking for me anymore. He was looking at the second step. Marcus reached out and picked up a photograph that was sitting on the stairs, something I swear wasn't there when I looked a moment ago. He stared at the photo and I saw his knees buckle. The cold, calculated killer dropped his gun and fell to the ground, screaming a name I never thought I'd hear. Position should have been satisfying, but it was just terrifying. Marcus was a machine, a man who had severed fingers without blinking. Now he was sobbing over a Polaroid. The stairs were doing something to his mind, digging into the one crack in his armor. The wind died completely. The trees stood still as statues. The silence was heavy, pressurized, like being underwater. I gripped my hunting knife, my only weapon aside from bear spray, and stayed low. I needed to move, to get the upper hand while he was distracted, but I couldn't look away. Suddenly, Marcus snapped. He scrambled to his feet, wiping the tears with a violent smear of his sleeve. His face wasn't sad anymore. It was twisted in a mask of pure, confused rage. He crumpled the photo and threw it at the marble steps. "Nice trick, Jack," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You think this saves you? You think I care about the past?" He was trying to rationalize the irrational, shouting at the trees, convinced I had set up some high-tech theater. He raised his gun, aiming not at the woods where I hid, but at the stairs themselves. He fired 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. The sound echoed like cannon fire. I expected stone chips to fly. I expected ricochet. But the stairs absorbed the bullets silently. Where the bullets hit the pristine white marble, no dust appeared. Instead, a thick, black liquid began to ooze out of the wounds, pulsing like arterial blood. The stairs let out a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my teeth, and the black liquid didn't drip down. It flowed upward, defying gravity, slithering toward Marcus's boots. Any sane human being would have bolted the moment gravity-defying tar started crawling toward them, but Marcus was driven by a specific kind of arrogance. He watched the black substance pool around the toe of his combat boot. He tried to lift his foot, but it was stuck fast. The forest was dead silent again, save for that maddening, low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. "Let go!" Marcus growled, firing another round into the base of the stairs. The bullet vanished into the stone without a sound. From my vantage point behind the oak roots, I looked up at the top of the staircase. The empty air above the final step began to warp like heat haze on asphalt. Colors bled into existence. A scene was forming. It wasn't the sky anymore. It was a room. a dimly lit, concrete room. Marcus stopped struggling. He looked up, his jaw going slack. The gun slipped from his fingers and landed in the mud with a wet thud. The black tar retracted, freeing his feet, but he didn't step back. The trap had changed its bait. The stairs knew he wasn't afraid of monsters, he was afraid of failure, and they were offering him success. I squinted, trying to make out the image hovering 15 feet in the air. It was a projection. It showed a chair in the center of a room, and tied to that chair, battered and bloody, was me. It was a vision of his mission completed, a vision of his vengeance satisfied. "I got you," Marcus whispered, a sick smile spreading across his face. He took the first step onto the marble, but as his weight settled on the stone, the vision at the top changed. The me in the chair lifted its head, looked directly at Marcus, and opened its mouth. But instead of a scream, thousands of black beetles poured out, cascading down the imaginary room and spilling onto the real stairs, Marcus, burying him in a writhing wave of black shells and clicking legs. He screamed, a sound of pure, primal panic, flailing his arms to wipe the insects from his face. It was a scene from a fever dream, but the sickening sound of crunching exoskeletons under his boots was terrifyingly real. This was my chance. While Marcus was blinded by the swarm, I scrambled from behind the oak roots. I didn't run away. I ran toward the mud where his dropped pistol lay half buried. My lungs burned and every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I knew if he survived the stairs, he'd come for me again. I needed that weapon. I dove into the mud, my fingers closing around the cold steel of the suppressor. I rolled onto my back, flicked the safety off, and aimed the gun at the man on the stairs. "Don't move," I yelled, my voice echoing against the trees. At the sound of my voice, the beetles vanished, instantly. No dead insects on the ground, no fading buzzing sound. They just ceased to exist. Marcus stood there on the first step, panting, his clothes disheveled but clean. He looked at me, then at the barrel of his own gun. His eyes narrowed. The fear was gone, replaced by cold calculation. He realized the beetles were an illusion. "You won't shoot, Jack," he sneered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're a ranger, not a killer. I am." He tensed his legs, preparing to step off the marble and lunge at me. He lifted his right foot to descend. But his foot didn't move. It was fused to the white stone. Marcus looked down in panic. The marble wasn't solid anymore. It had turned into a thick, white quicksand that was swallowing his boots up to the ankles. And then, from the deep woods behind me, where I had just been hiding, came a sound that froze my blood. The distinct, mechanical rack of a shotgun slide. The distinct clack-clack of a pump-action shotgun is a sound you feel in your spine before your brain even processes it. It was directly behind me, maybe 10 feet away. I didn't dare turn around. I kept the pistol trained on Marcus, who was now sinking up to his shins in the solid marble. "Drop it, Ranger," a gravelly voice growled from behind. It wasn't a local accent, it was city, hard. Marcus laughed, a desperate, choked sound. "Took you long enough, Rourke. Shoot him, just shoot him and get me out of this cement." So, there were two of them. Rourke. I slowly placed the pistol on the mud and raised my hands. I turned slowly. Rourke was a giant of a man, holding a Mossberg shotgun. He looked at me, then looked past me at Marcus. His eyes went wide. He didn't see a man stuck in quicksand. He saw something else entirely. "Marcus?" Rourke whispered, the shotgun barrel dipping toward the ground. Why are you on fire?" Marcus screamed. "I'm not burning, you idiot. I'm sinking. Pull me out." The stairs were showing Rourke a different nightmare. To Marcus, it was quicksand. To Rourke, his partner was engulfed in invisible flames. The stairs were tailoring the horror to the specific fears of the observer. "Help him!" I yelled, taking a massive gamble. "Grab him before he burns to ash. He's dying!" I needed Rourke distracted. It worked. Rourke's instinct overrode his orders. He rushed past me, slinging the shotgun over his shoulder, and reached out to grab Marcus's outstretched hand. The moment Rourke's skin touched Marcus's hand, a shockwave blasted through the clearing, knocking me flat on my back. I looked up to see that Rourke wasn't pulling Marcus out. He was being pulled in. The marble stairs had turned into a vacuum, sucking both men toward the center. And then, the stairs began to speak, not with a child's voice this time, but with Rourke's own voice, screaming a warning from the future as the physics of the world broke before my eyes. Rourke and Marcus weren't just stuck to the marble. They were melting into it. The white stone softened like wax under a blowtorch, wrapping around their limbs. Rourke's heavy arm fused into Marcus's shoulder, their flesh merging in a sickening display of biological impossibility. Their screams harmonized into a single, vibrating frequency that was so high-pitched it shattered the glass face of my watch. I scrambled backward, mud slicking my palms, fighting the urge to vomit. "Let them go," I shouted, though I didn't know who or what I was asking. The forest didn't care. The entity beneath the marble was hungry. The mass of fused flesh and cloth was dragged forcibly up the spiral steps, jerked upward not by gravity, but by a violent magnetic pull from the top platform. The air above the stairs ripped open. It wasn't a projection this time. It was a physical tear in the fabric of the sky, revealing a gray, swirling void that smelled of ozone and copper. They reached the top. The struggle stopped. They looked down at me one last time. Two faces partially melded together, eyes wide with a knowledge no human mind could endure. Then, with a wet, tearing sound, they were sucked into the void. The tear in the sky zipped shut instantly. The marble solidified, turning back into cold, hard stone. No blood, no bodies, just the white stairs standing innocently in the green woods, as if nothing had happened. I stood up, my legs trembling uncontrollably. I was alone. I had survived. I turned to run, desperate to get back to my truck and drive until I hit the coast. I took 3 running steps toward the tree line. My face slammed into something hard and invisible. I fell backward, blood gushing from my nose. I scrambled up and felt the air in front of me. It was solid, cold and smooth like glass. I ran 10 feet to the left and hit it again. Panic set in. The stairs hadn't just eaten the hitman. They had erected a barrier. I wasn't free. I was in a cage, locked inside the wall until my knuckles bled. It was a perfect dome, sealing me in a radius of about 50 feet around the staircase. The air inside was getting stale, warmer by the second. I realized with a jolt of terror that the barrier wasn't just a cage. It was a trash compactor. The trees at the edge of the clearing began to bend and snap as the invisible sphere started to shrink. I turned back to the marble spiral. It was the key. The logic of the physical world had been overwritten by the logic of the stairs. If I wanted the door to open, I had to knock. I walked toward it, my boots heavy as lead. The silence was deafening. No hum, no whispers, just the sound of the ancient oaks snapping like toothpicks behind me as the wall closed in. On the third step, the step that had held the raincoat and Marcus's photo, there was a new object. It was small, silver, and glinting in the sun. My old police badge. The one I turned in when I testified against the corruption in my precinct. The piece of metal that ruined my life and sent me running to the woods. I picked it up. It was ice cold, burning my skin. A voice echoed, not from the air, but from inside my own skull. It was my voice, but calm, devoid of fear. They paid their debt with blood, Jack, but you haven't paid yours. You brought them here. You are the carrier. The wall was now 10 feet behind me. I could feel the pressure change, my ears popping. The stairs were giving me a choice, be crushed into paste by the shrinking barrier or climb into the unknown. What do you want? I screamed at the white stone. The voice inside my head laughed, a dry, rattling sound. I want the truth you didn't tell the jury. I want the name you left out. I froze. I thought I had buried that secret deeper than anyone could find. The stairs knew. I took a breath, placed my foot on the first step, and the crushing weight in the air evaporated instantly. But as I climbed, the world around me began to desaturate. The vibrant green of the Appalachian summer faded into a dull, grainy gray. I wasn't just climbing a physical structure anymore. I was ascending through the layers of my own subconscious, stripping away the lies I had told myself for 2 years. I didn't just run to hide from Marcus, I muttered, taking the third step. My legs felt heavy, as if I were dragging chains. I ran because I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. The voice in my head returned, sharper this time. The name, Jack. Give us the name, and the debt is paid. I reached the halfway point. The spiral was tight, making me dizzy. Below me, the ground seemed miles away, though I was only 10 feet up. In the veins of the marble, I saw faces shifting. The jury, the judge, the families of the victims. They were all looking at me with disappointment. I protected him. I yelled, the words tearing at my throat. I testified against the foot soldiers, but I let the king stay on the throne. I was 3 steps from the top. The air was thin and smelled of ozone and courthouse furniture polish. Ooh! The voice boomed, vibrating the very marrow of my bones. Zip! I slammed my boot onto the final platform. I fell to my knees, gripping the edge of the marble slab. I closed my eyes and screamed the truth I had buried under a mountain of whiskey and isolation. Captain Miller! It was Captain Miller! He ordered the hit! I kept his name out of the deposition to keep my pension. I sold justice for a paycheck. The silence that followed was absolute. The gray world shattered. Color rushed back into the trees below. The invisible dome disintegrated with the sound of breaking glass. I was free. The stairs had accepted my currency. But the transaction wasn't over. The marble platform beneath me became transparent, like a window. I wasn't looking down at the grass anymore. I was looking through a portal directly into Captain Miller's office in the city, 300 miles away. He was sitting at his desk, coffee in hand. He looked up, his eyes locking with mine through the impossible window. Just as pale, marble hands burst through his floorboards, no sound came through the marble window. but I saw the terror in his eyes, the same terror Marcus had felt. The pale hands dragged him down, phasing him through the floor of his office as if the concrete were water. He clawed at his mahogany desk, his coffee mug shattering on the floor, but it was useless. In seconds, the man who had corrupted an entire precinct and ordered the deaths of witnesses was gone, pulled into the earth, taken by the stairs. The transparency of the platform faded, returning to solid white stone. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the high-altitude air. The guilt that had weighed on my chest for 2 years was gone. I felt light, hollowed out, but clean. I descended the spiral steps. When my boots hit the grass of the clearing, the stairs didn't vanish. They didn't turn black. They simply stood there, gleaming in the sun, waiting. I walked back to Fire Tower 4. I didn't run. I didn't hide. 2 days later, the news broke. Captain Miller had vanished from a locked office. Police were baffled. There was no sign of struggle, no entry or exit, just a shattered coffee mug and a faint smell of ozone. They called it a mystery. I called it a transaction. I didn't quit my job. In fact, I renewed my contract. I realized then that the Appalachian woods don't just harbor monsters. They harbor justice, ancient, brutal justice. I still patrol Sector 8. The stairs are always there, though they move around from time to time. I've learned to read the signs, the sudden silence of the cicadas, the smell of copper. Sometimes I find lost hikers and guide them back to the trail, but sometimes I find people who are running from things darker than bears, people with blood on their hands. When I find them, I don't arrest them. I don't call the police. I just give them friendly directions to a nice, quiet clearing where they can find a beautiful white staircase. I tell them the view from the top is to die for, and it always is.